My thoughts on Aether and Iron waged war against each other inside my head, like low-class housewives fighting over the last air fryer on a Black Friday sale at Walmart. I soldiered through the entire afternoon trying to elucidate how I really felt about the game. The night had already crept up the sky by the time only one idea remained. This game scratches the surface of greatness. And there it was. That was to be the turnstone of my next review. And thus began my creative endeavor. It was smooth sailing at first. Each word bled into the next effortlessly, like foul rhymes coming out of the mouth of your average reggaeton singer. Until I came upon the next literary conundrum. The question struck me like my mother's palm every time I ate the last portion of the dessert that she had reserved for the neighbor. Do I actually like Aether and Iron? Is it a masterfully paced amalgamation of immersive narrative and RPG mechanics that delivers on the things we expect from the genre, without overindulging in any of its tropes? Or do I find its narration to be a pretentious nothing burger that fails to scratch the surface of anything even remotely thought-provoking, and its gameplay nothing more than a mirage of RPG mechanics that fails to live up to the implicit promises of the genre? Well, what if I told you, dear viewer, that it's somehow both of these things? If you are still watching the video, you're probably not easily discouraged by embellished rhetoric and excessive figures of speech. Well, if that's the case, then you probably won't mind the endless deluge of metaphor and poetic prose that is Aether and Iron. Hell, you might even enjoy it, like I did. But if you think narration and storytelling in video games should be as lean and sparse as possible, that video games aren't books or films, and that gameplay should always come first, then turn away now or abandon hope, all ye who enter here. Aether and Iron sit somewhere in between point-and-click adventure game and RPG a la Disco Elysium, though your character does not move around the setting as it does in some of those other games. The game takes place in a series of maps and scenarios with clickable points of interest. It does have combat though, and it resembles the one in Death Roads. It's not bad, and combat encounters do get better as you progress in the game, but it's also nowhere near the levels of complexity, fun, or badassery that you had in Death Roads, but we'll get to that soon enough. Aether and Iron is a serviceable amalgamation of genres and mechanics, but I feel like in every aspect of the game, Seismic Squirrel and Chaos Theory, the developers of the game, either failed to do that one last thing that was needed for the game to be truly great, or chose the less important thing over the more important one. And that's why I think Aether and Iron scratches the surface of greatness. Pity, cause it could have been the game of the year. I'll try to address the main aspects of the game and tell you about what I think is missing or wrong in each of them. And let's start with Aether and Iron as an RPG. I've always favored RPGs over other gaming genres, because in these games, who and what your character is usually matters. In the best RPGs, who and what you are in the world has a major impact on how you end up sorting out the game's challenges. And this happens by means of features that amount to what we now know as emergent gameplay, player agency, and in the narrative end of things, branching story paths. In my book, Disco Elysium succeeds in giving the player the ability to make meaningful decisions that affect the narrative. You can try to bring down the corpse from the tree by shooting at the noose with Kim's pistol. Whether you succeed or not depends on a skill check. If your character isn't very good at thumb-eye coordination challenges, there's a good chance you'll fail. And if that happens, you'll have to look for an alternative approach. This entails coercing or convincing Measurehead, the semi-supremacist guy, to help you. If you can't coerce him, or if you choose to convince him, then he asks for a little something in return. Something that makes it look as though the police is on his side of the Union strike conflict. You can also not ever bring the corpse down, which sends you down a very different narrative path. So, if you don't succeed in shooting the rope, first you have to think a little bit about who else can lend a hand, because it's not readily obvious. You have to walk about and ask around. And second, there are consequences. In Aether and Iron, most choices and skill checks are alternative ways to accomplish the same objectives, just as they are in Disco Elysium. But first, they are all presented to you as interactive hotspots in the same screen. There is no walking about and figuring out where to go and who to talk to. So the figuring out aspect of the game goes out the window. Second, very few of the choices you make have an important long-term consequence. I would need to play the game again to be sure of this, but to me it felt like rather than branching story paths, you have only one highway with different lanes. Take this part for example, in which you need to enter this building. All these points of interest represent interactive scripted events with skill checks, and the likelihood of you succeeding in any of them depends on the skills you have chosen to cultivate and the items that you have in your inventory. But then the game doesn't really give a shit about how you enter the building. Sometimes failing a skill check results in a fight, which is cool, and sometimes you have to decide between agreeing with NPC A or NPC B, and depending on who you agree with, things play out slightly differently for the remainder of the mission, which is also cool. In the final stretch of the game, there is a critical choice that determines which NPC will continue to help you all the way to the end. There is a mission that you do alongside a supposedly important character, and I suspect that the choices that you make during this mission have an impact on the character's disposition later on in the game, and maybe even whether or not he appears again, which is also cool. You can also choose which companions to bring along for the game's various missions, and their skill points get added to some skill checks. They also have a few character-specific interventions here and there, which is nice. There is a moral system, but I didn't feel like it had much of an impact, to the point that I felt like it was a bit of an afterthought. But the thing is that the skills that you choose to specialize in, the companions that you choose to bring along for the game's various missions, or the choices you make during the game's many conversations, don't make any significant difference in how the game plays out. You still have to do the same missions, you still meet the same characters, and as a whole, the game turns out in the exact same way. There is one very impactful choice near the end, I think, but that's about it. I didn't expect something like tyranny, but I do think they could have given you more agency. There's a customary Fallout-esque final succession of stills telling you about what became of the world, your companions, and your main character, and it does take into account many of the choices you made, but it also leaves out some very important things. And holy shit does it feel underwhelming when compared to Fallout, Arcanum, Tyranny, etc. Aether Iron is as story-driven as a game can be, and the story itself is as linear as they come. There are plenty of dialogue choices and skill checks, but at best, narratively, they feel like different lanes in a highway that take you to the same destination. And this turns the build aspect of the game when it comes to the story into a bit of an illusion, almost a farce even. The rest of the mechanics and features that you expect from an RPG are there. You level up, you gain points, you allocate them to your skills. You can trade between characters, you can buy and sell stuff, equip your car with items, etc. It's the RPG experience itself that isn't quite there for me. Combat. Combat is not bad, but it's also nothing to write home about. Sometimes it felt like combat encounters were a little too frequent, and some others like they were too far in between. Combat encounters become more interesting as you progress in the game, but I wouldn't count any of them as the highlight of Aether Iron. Vehicle combat is the only type of combat that you have in Aether Iron, and while most chase sequences feel organic to the story, some of them feel a little bit forced. Like the devs felt like too much time had elapsed without a fight and some action was needed. And sometimes it just felt weird. Like you're having a conversation outside a building, the discussion gets heated, so people run to their cars and a chase sequence starts while they are still yelling at each other from their cars.
I'm sorry, what?
There is this part in which someone tries to hit you with an axe, so both you and your aggressor run to your cars and you try to ram each other to death. I think Aether Iron needed additional combat mechanics, something along the lines of Darkest Dungeon maybe. This Death Roads-like combat feels forced at times, like they bent the story to make chase sequences happen. This lack is made even more painful by the fact that most non-vehicle skirmishes get resolved with skill checks and narration. Combat is turn-based and it takes place on a grid, which is the streets. You control your party members' cars and you do battle against enemy vehicles. You have companions in Aether Iron, and each companion has a couple of skill trees with skills that apply in combat. There are also different types of vehicles, and not everyone can drive every type of car. You can also equip different types of weapons, armor, and auxiliary gear on your cars. And this too depends on the car. Not every car can have every type of weapon. And there is a build aspect to all of these moving parts, and it's cool that you can hone each companion to play a role in the fight. I turned Luca into my tank. I gave him taunt skills, and yes, you have those in this game. Skills that made him retaliate when hit, and skills that made him more resilient. I also made his car as sturdy as I could. Cress was more of a support character, and Gia herself was a DPS specialist. Some skills synergize nicely with some types of weapons, and some vehicles are designed to work with certain weapons and non-weapon components. You also get more vehicles and companions, so you can swap vehicles and components around as much as you want. In theory, that is. In practice, you'll see that some cars are quite obviously meant to be used by some characters. But aside from the fact that you only have vehicle combat in the game, and that it doesn't always suit the story, there are a few issues that I have with it. First, the game never really challenges your build. There aren't any vehicle-specific situations, or even situations that'll make you say, huh, interesting, I'm getting my ass kicked. I probably should try again with this other car and these other weapons to counter what these bad guys are doing. I had a very questionable build for a good chunk of the game, and I never felt like I needed to go back to the drawing board, so to speak, to make adjustments. If the game had been a bit more challenging, then the build aspect of the game might have also been a bit more interesting. Combat in Aether Iron is more about sorting out obstacles and hazards and using bystanders to your advantage. And later on in the game, the way you do this depends a lot on your build. The problem is that your build should have mattered more and sooner. Second, new companions join you as you progress in the story, but since the story is linear, you need to wait until you recruit everyone before you have a robust cast of party members to choose from. Luca and Benny, for example, appear very late in the game in my opinion. And the same is true of cars. It would have been more exciting if you had had more options with which to experiment earlier on in the game. Third, it just lacks the oomph, the holy shit factor, and the unapologetic badassery of Death Roads. The fights themselves are okay, they are entertaining and stake-driven, but the problem is that Death Roads exists, and literally everything that has to do with combat is better in that game. Skills are more tactical, there's a clearly defined overarching strategic aspect to the game, enemies are varied and smart, there are cool car pilot skill synergies and cross-skill synergies, and skills themselves are ridiculously badass. And it has phenomenal sound and music, so yeah, Aether Iron combat feels a bit like discount Death Roads, but still entertaining. Combat is not bad again, but it's frustrating that they had all the ingredients to make something a heck of a lot better, and didn't. Story, setting, and characters. This is perhaps the most frustrating aspect of the game in my book. In all my years of gaming, I kid you not, I have never come across dialogue lines and bits of narration as sophisticated and as well written as the ones in Aether Iron. As far as the word craft goes, that is. I swear there's more vocabulary in any conversation between any two NPCs in this game than in 90% of the games that I've gotten codes for lately. And that includes story-intensive RPGs. These writers know what they are doing, I tell you. Gia's sophisticated internal monologues, rife with metaphors, seamlessly flow from narrating the events that are taking place at the time to insight on what she's thinking about what is going on and what to do next. And in the hands of less skilled writers, this would have gotten old and so fucking boring very soon in the game. But I think the writers were usually careful not to overindulge in figures of speech whenever there was an action bit going on or an impactful revelation about to take place. Oh, that sounds pretty fucking awesome. Color me intrigued, right?
Wrong.
Sorry, it's not entirely
Wrong.
There's a lot to like about the writing in Aether Iron, but great writing isn't the same as great storytelling. And Aether Iron at times feels like they asked a top-of-the-line carpenter versed in the most sophisticated techniques of marquetry and tarsia and wood graining to make a series of chairs. And he decided to put a spike in the middle of the seat of one of them and to make another one with two diagonally opposed legs. Allow me to elaborate, dear viewer. The game takes place in an alternate 1930s New York, in which the land has fragmented into islands that are kept afloat through the centripetal force of a whirlwind of something called ether. There are also ether-powered flying cars and ether-powered lasers that can reduce entire buildings to cinders in the blink of an eye. You play as Giovanna Randazzo, a smuggler and gun for hire who has fallen on hard times after one too many fuck-ups and is now looking for that one heist that'll help her start rebuilding her reputation. And let me tell you, this is the coolest character that I have played as this decade. Holy fuck is she cool. From her impeccable sense of fashion, always wearing the latest scream and smuggler wear, to her cool and collected demeanor, to her mental dexterity, always ready with a clever remark, always observing, always connecting the dots, good-looking, resourceful, sophisticated. I remember showing this game on CBS and everyone being mesmerized with Gia's character. Within the first minute, one of you had already browsed the internet to see if the actress who played her was hot. Gia's character is not your average feminist power fantasy character that we've seen a million times since the post-2016 disease started ruining entertainment. If you think of it, Gia's one and only true advantage over the other characters is that she's streetwise. She's been around, she's seen things, she has been imparted some pretty harsh lessons, and she's been given little choice but to learn from them. Gia's a seasoned smuggler who knows when to play into someone's ego, when to appeal to someone's better nature, and when to be straightforward or even coercive. She is completely out of her depth when Nellie starts talking about the scientific implications of her work. She lacks Luca's physical strength or his authority as leader of the Union. She's nowhere near as cunning or calculating as Sophie, and she lacks Benny's audacity and single-minded determination. These characters complement her talents, she needs them, and she knows it. I like that the story starts with Gia trying to get back on her feet with a new job, and that she soon becomes entangled in something that turns out to be more than she bargained for, and she's left with no choice but to see this job through to the end. Stakes keep getting higher as she keeps jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire until she finds herself in the middle of a world-ending threat. So far so good, right? But there are a couple of things that didn't work for me. Gia is a smuggler who also dabbles in other similarly questionable lines of work. Though if you ask me, I think she should have ditched the whole smuggler thing and taken up a job as a novelist or a poetess, because holy fucking shit does she have the gift for words and a knack for metaphor and figures of speech.
The train leaps down the track like a greyhound foaming after a jackrabbit. Its rattling cars sway like bulky charms on a long, ugly bracelet. Far below us, I spy the spark and glow of White Street's ashen wasteland. It's always laundry day in the Raymond district. Sheets quiver around me like phantoms as I look for a ghost from my past. Needles Portnoy, a smuggler I have every kind of history with. The old railway warehouse is deep in magical territory. It stinks of stale booze and dangerous boredom. Violence is crouched and ready to leap out from every crevice in this den of riveted steel and stacked crates.
How a smuggler from the lower ends with little access to education managed to master the art of wordsmithing the way she has is beyond me. But I guess if a cell phone salesman from Wales can sing Nessun Dorma like Luciano Pavarotti, anything's possible. Also, Gia's relationships with characters that are supposed to be important to her seem to serve more of a utilitarian purpose in the story. She keeps talking about how much she misses Sio, and when she's not sure about what to do, she always thinks about what Sio would do in her place. It's like a little voice that guides her, but we never know what made Sio so important. There are a couple of flashbacks here and there, and a couple of times in which she reminisces about times in which the man was still alive, but there's nothing there that helps to establish him as a wise mentor. We do see him giving some advice, but it's just commonplace stuff. Not something that would make you say, holy shit, I can see why Gia looks up to this guy. Something similar happens with Piotr, also known as Needles. Everything that happens between these two seems to occur by royal decree of the script. They had a fallout at some point in the past, but the events that took place and how they reacted to them feel
Weird.
It feels more like they reacted that way because the story needed it, rather than as a natural consequence of what happened. Same thing with a little mission in which they had to work together. Things happen the way they do because the story needs it. And then,
Mild spoilers coming your way.
they fix things also because the script demands it. Also, I really didn't care about Gia's relationship with Needles because I never got a good idea of who he is, except for the fact that he used to work with Sio and that he is also a smuggler and a master tailor. And I know what some of you are thinking. If there isn't much player agency, if there's barely any action, and if the build aspect of the game is almost irrelevant, then the story better be nothing short of
amazing.
well, that depends on how you look at it. For me, stories in video games tend to fall, broadly speaking, in one of two camps. Those which seek to entertain and those which aspire to reflect upon the big questions of humanity, and if they are pretentious enough, to answer them. Video game history is rife with examples of stories that have succeeded as either one of these things, and there are some that walked some sort of middle ground or even tackled both of these things competently. Now, if I told you that Aether Iron's story relies very heavily on the main character's internal monologue, and that most passages seem to have been taken straight out of a book of poems by Yeats, you'd think the game's story sits firmly in the camp of games that try to tackle the big questions of humanity. Games that weave the writer's take on said questions into the fabric of the narrative, right?
Wrong.
Well, no. It's actually pretty straightforward, unpretentious, and entertaining. Every scene in a film or a game should serve to tell you something about the characters, or the setting, or the plot itself. Ideally, they should do all three things. And much to my surprise, Gia's sensitive internal monologue, while definitely hard to buy coming from a smuggler from the lower end of the city, serves to turn every scene in the game into a vital piece of the story that also expands upon the characters involved and the setting in which the story takes place. And that's why every single scene is interesting, gripping even. I never speed clicked through any conversation, and I never felt like the game had outstayed its welcome. The story is not perfect though. Some passages feel a little bit crowbarred and like they were there to extend the game's running time, meaning the story would have still been perfectly understandable without them. There's a scene about an accident in which one of your guns gets tossed into a building and you have to go after it. Sure, it serves to accentuate the fact that people are suffering under the wasting and to emphasize Nellie's empathetic disposition, but the scene itself is forced and inconsequential. There's a scene about a race that's held in the honor of a powerful baron that serves to strengthen the idea that the does are assholes, that they are at each other's throats, and that the baroness is a conniving bitch. It also throws a bit of badly needed action, but it feels like an unnecessary narrative detour. There is this part in which people rebel against their religious leader, but the build up to this event isn't strong enough in my opinion, and the thing that makes people finally revolt is a newspaper article, which seems a little bit forced. Some characters get mentioned several times before Gia meets them, as though the game were building them up to be something important to the story, but then they appear, they do their shit, they have a longer than average conversation with Gia about nothing important, and then fuck off into oblivion. Also, some characters get plot-convenient magical secret crit rolls on persuasion and end up convincing other characters who don't really have anything to gain by changing their minds, all because the force of the plot compels them. Still, the story has great pace, the setting in which the story takes place is fresh and immersive, there are some sensationally cool passages here and there, and Gia's just too fucking cool as a character, without being an insufferable girl boss, although there are a few of those here and there. She is also aware that she needs Sophie's connections and Lucas' brute strength and his immense pull with the Union. Gia's a seasoned, sophisticated smuggler who's also clever and knowledgeable in everything pertaining the underworld, but she's completely out of her depth when it comes to the great threat looming in the horizon. Her companion Nellie is the exact opposite. She's dangerously naive, but she's also one of the few people who understands the magnitude of the threat of the well, and one of the only people who has the knowledge required to stop it. These two play off of each other nicely, and their contrasting personalities and interactions carry the bulk of the story. I think the writers were careful to never depict Nellie as an annoying brat or Gia as a patronizing surrogate mother. Level of contamination. Remember how back in the day you could buy a game like King's Quest IV, The Dagger of Amon-Ra, or The Longest Journey, and not worry about the main character being an insufferable girl boss or having the message shoved down your throat?
Just be sure to accept the truth when you find it.
Pepperidge Farm remembers, but that was then and this is now, and I wouldn't blame you for being suspicious about this title. You play as Gia. You have to look out for Nellie, who is the key to everything. Then you meet your friend, Mechanic, and Aether Cress. The next party member you recruit is Sophie, a slick, charming, and cunning doe. Your vendor of choice is the larger-than-life smuggler Tajana. I think you know where this is going. But like I said, Giovanna is not your insufferable girl boss who can do no wrong and whose character arc is to realize how awesome she is. The men in the game are also not all petty, incompetent, evil, or subservient to a stronger, smarter female character. And the game never feels as though the writers have taken it upon themselves to make the cogs of society move quicker towards a better version of itself.
There are more important things in this world than pride, Cress. Do not sacrifice yourself to make the wheel move faster. It will always turn toward a better future, one day at a time.
Luca is a strong, seasoned man who looks after his people. He has pull with the Union and he's a family man through and through. His wife is there to support him, not to be his boss or his better. And the game does not diminish him for being a family-first guy, quite the contrary. Benny is an intrepid, smart, and resourceful kid who surprises everyone with good ideas and bold and daring plans that end up working. plans that no one else would have dared putting in practice. Apollo and Sam lead the underground competently, often laying out sound plans and even saving the day from time to time. I was actually even impressed with some of Sam's pearls of wisdom. I found myself agreeing and even nodding with some of the things he said. Aether Iron is not drenched in post-2016 contamination, though female characters are prevalent in the game, and it does play it very safe with some topics in a modern day kind of way. Other considerations. The art direction is fantastic and the art itself is pretty good. I love how everything comes together into an interesting, immersive, cohesive whole. Every location looks awesome, every single character model is interesting, every single outfit is fitting and detailed. The UI is slick and seamless, though sometimes a little bit intrusive. The music is also very good, it's understated and relevant to the vibe and theme without being a maelstrom of cliches. The voice acting is a bit all over the place though. Gia, Sophie, and Professor Gartner are really good, but you also have a couple of stinkers here and there, like this guy. Thankfully, the most important characters are at least decent, if not great. Aether Iron currently goes for $10 in my region, and I think it's a solid deal for the price. If you are looking for emergent gameplay, player agency, and branching story paths, then Aether Iron is going to leave you wanting more. If you are looking for a game that challenges your strategic skills and your tactical capabilities, Aether Iron is not it. But if the concept of a sci-fi themed choose-your-own-adventure game with RPG elements that takes place in an alternate 1930s New York, where there's flying cars and islands that float in mid-air because science, bitch, then I think you're going to love Aether Iron, even if it's not all it could have been. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs up. If you like what you are seeing on this channel, please consider subscribing to keep the channel from dying a horrible death, and hit that notification bell to avoid the usual YouTube shenanigans. Come check us out on Discord if you don't mind all the boomer talk that goes on there. I personally love it and wouldn't change it for anything, and share the video if you thought it was good. Bye everyone.
You're excused. You can go back to playing video games.